in fact, I will speak about all those things, a little bit less on the awareness. This is not really my topic, but I try also to lean out a little bit of the window, so to foster discussion also about consciousness. What I really speak about is creative sleep and adversarial dreams. That's our contribution, and be a little bit provocative with Matthew Larcom's Tiger, perhaps, although a dangerous game, and those things. And my microcircuitries have already been mentioned by Lars right now, and I would like to start also in this sense from these cortical microcircuitries that I'm usually speaking about. This is error backpropagation that I do believe is happening in the brain since a while. With João Sacramento, some 4 years ago already, we were suggesting this type of error backpropagation. We call it even dendritic backpropagation, where an error is extracted through cortical microcircuitries. So inhibitory neurons try to explain away what top-down feedback predicts, and what it is remaining is an error. And that error is specific to that neuron it is constructed, can learn to become specific. So this is a general theory we are building, and it is related even to optimal control, because we are now postulating that this error is even prospective, telling whether it's worth to spike now to reduce an error in the future. So there's a whole theory I'm typically speaking about, including this so-called least action principle. I'm relating this to physics and so on. I'm not speaking here about this, but I would like to tell you that we can relate all those things I'm telling you to those microcircuitries. That's the idea. And you can also look up a bit in here. What I will speak about is this sleep model from Nicolas, who's also here, with my collaborators like Jacob Jordan, Mihai Petrovici, and so on. So this sleep model is related, perhaps to some sense, to this awareness. And here, this idea of creative sleep is entering. And as we heard, with, of course, top-down connectivity. And as soon as you are also dreaming, the question arises, if we can activate V1 through dreams, from where do I know that my V1 activity is now dreamed or really triggered by sensory stimuli? So we postulate that we have an additional real dream discriminator. Here we have him, and that is especially also active during REM dream, and during the REM dream helps us to shape this generative network here. So these dreams you're postulating, the REM dreams, and we know all that these REM dreams are really emotional. This is sympathetic nervous system that is going up, and they're combining many different ways that we have seen during the day into strange new concepts. And this is what I would like to show you with one of those examples of such a possible creative and adversarial REM dream, simply grabbed from the internet, but it captures our ideas that during REM we are combining all the memories into new creative V1 activity. So you think here of a combination of that rose from which we were starting into tulips. And this will be the core of our REM sleep model that is, of course, also integrated in the classical sleep model with wakefulness and non-REM dream. So kind of a dance of roses and tulips to relate to our Montparnasse experience. So, and since you, Cyril, were already alluding to this creative coding, I didn't plan to go into that, it's a future paper. In fact, I do believe that we are missing lots of things if we focus too much on predictive coding and Bayesian framework. We believe to even have a consciousness theory. Consciousness is emerging from these, and big people speaking about that. We just published a paper about predictive coding and olfactory system of the fruit fly. I think it's a good model for those low-level animals. If you would like to understand human behavior, we have a creative coding. I'm dreaming of something. The next day I do things that I was putting together in mind. And those things are evolving. And other people perhaps predict what I'm going to do. Yes, but first it's the creation. And I think they're missing this. And I believe that REM dream takes an important role in this creative coding. Just to be a little bit watching out. And here is now what I'm leaning out a little bit of the window, although not on Montparnasse now, but if you're asked, of what are you becoming aware here? Of course, it's a tulip in front of the field, and that's the challenge of the tiger. I'm not sure whether it's a match of expectation that is highlighting us what we see. The spotlight may be driven by a mismatch and by these errors that I showed you are representing according to our theory in the apical tree. So here is one option. So of course it's well known, this the other metaphor is telling we have a shed light onto this tulip now. Select and grab. And it's not new that becoming aware is a kind of a mental form of selecting and grabbing these multisensory inputs, maybe also actions that are triggered from those representations. But what I would like to add is now this additional, and Matthew's telling us layer 5 pyramidal neurons, maybe B, the one are involved in the selection. What I would like to add is this discriminator, because again, V1 can be active by closed eyes, and we must have a discrimination and a label telling us, okay, this is real, so become aware of this thing as real. And I'm coming to this reality discriminator thing actually from the sheer need of describing here sleep, of improving our internal representation of visual objects. This is very pragmatic, our goal. And by doing that, we realize that we have to improve a generative network that is helping us dreaming new options, by which we are testing the model the next day. We are showing from Cypher 10, this database of 10 objects with different backgrounds, and the next day, new, never-seen images. And if we had REM sleep, creative REM sleep, we are better in classifying those new images. That's very pragmatically where we are starting off. And one postulate is that this feature of creative dream may also be helpful now in becoming aware of seeing something real, and so on. And we were hearing from Matthew that thalamus is involved in this gating. Would like to draw your attention to other work. This is related to so-called reality monitoring. People know that the anterior prefrontal cortex is related in telling whether you are aware that you're seeing something or actually only believing that you are imaging, imagining something. Another old world, Perky effect. Some of you will know, in 1910, more than 100 years ago, she was showing that often, well, actually that we can effectively see something, and it's there, the stimulus, but we believe we just imagined it. So different ways of either hallucinating something that is not out there and we believe it, but some also is possible to have this Perky effect of believing they're imagining something even if it's there. So the different ways, and this anterior prefrontal cortex is involved in both types of getting wrong about that discriminative judgment of real or dream. So how now, coming back to our model, how does this work? And again, we can have now V1 activity being triggered from this internal latent representation, as we say, and this is copied into those forward streams. And again, we do not know now, is it now coming from imagination or from outside? And here our discriminator sets in here. In that case, it's imagine, and we are learning it's becoming imagine. Maybe we also know because we close the eye, so we have a teacher for that discriminator network. Now you should learn that what you see kind of in V1 is really only imagined because you have closed eyes. And we're training this discriminator, and it's important also now to get this generative network being trained. So let's explain you how learning in that network is working. So we first have this encoder network and this discriminator network that simply captures sensor input, and we learn to, in that case, match the discriminator output to be real because we know it's real. So we learn by backpropagation here that it is real. Okay? Now we have this other phase, and we are dreaming of a tulip, projecting this tulip down to V1, and now the question is how we improve our imagination of those concepts we have in mind. And here this idea of the adversarial dream is entering. Let's put this awareness aside. Here is now really our simulations, and this goes back also to this idea of GANs, that you may know, these generative adversarial networks by Goodfellow. 43,000 of citations, really the thing that seems so powerful in artificial intelligence. Gershman wrote a very nice article of how it could be implemented in the brain. And here it goes now. So we are imagining a tulip. Feed this down into V1, up again. And now we claim that those, instead of the backpropagation here, up here again from the end to the beginning, we are changing the sign of plasticity and inverted plasticity, because we do not want to learn that this tulip here is going to be classified by imagined. This would be simple. We simply start to generate crap things that would never be seen from outside. So instead, the generative network gets this adversarial strategy of just inverting the rule and creating here something that looks real. By inverting this rule, you just do the opposite so that you the classifier here, the discriminator, has a hard job in figuring out whether it's now real or not. That's the adversarial idea. So you do the opposite, and by that try to generate a real-looking image so that the classifier starts believing it's really real, but in fact it's wrong. It's produced from inside. That's this adversarial component. Again, strong ideas not from us, but we are grabbing these ideas and implement it into a cortical network with very, very basic elements without additional tricks that are typically accompanied with these ideas. Okay, so here is our REM model now. So as you have seen in the movie, we're now combining past memories into a new idea, roses and tulips, project those down, and here we have the overlaid mixture thing, and this should improve now, as we have seen in the dream, according to these ideas of adversarial learning, this discriminator here. Really try to produce real-looking images here through this inversion of plasticity. That's the trick here. And we postulate that such discriminators are present in the brain, and there is lots of evidence actually that during sleep you may have a switch of plasticity. There is suggestion showing that if there is also a cut actually of backpropagating action potential, you switch in fact in the apical tree plasticity learning rule, STDP learning rule, and so on. Plenty of evidence that this might be a reasonable synaptic plasticity rule. So here is now our full model of sleep. We were adding that one here, that's the new thing, but we are integrated it in a classical sleep model that is typically only that part here. I'll take you through all those phases. Of course, we start with learning during the wake state what we see. And we see here a dog. We project this up in this latent representation, and we project this down again through the generative network that is producing something, and we learn to match what is produced by the generative network with this type of layer 2-3 pyramidal neurons with what the forward stream, also layer 2-3 pyramidal neurons, is seeing, and somehow we learn to match. So we adapt here those synapses here actually to the whole pathway. We have an error here, we backpropagate the error up here, always adapt those synapses here, adapt until they're coming back here. And we believe that's physiological based on our backprop algorithm. That's the wake thing. During non-REM, we have the imagination of these objects, and all the memory is replayed from hippocampus, and we are generating now again the mental imagination or the dream actually during slow wave non-REM sleep, and we again encode this V1 activity in that case and try to match in the latent space what the encoder delivers with what from hippocampus was replayed. Okay? And again, error backpropagation, there's an error, and so we backpropagate now here, back down, until here to improve again this encoding network. This is a famous wake-sleep algorithm. We're just complementing that a little bit with this occlusion, also to relate to Lars Muckli's experiment. So during non-REM, we are improving our internal representation so that we are robust against variations that are happening outside. But this dimension of possible noise is too high. We can have any variation. And that's why we need this additional dream phase. We want to dream something that looks realistic. Right, and this is why we need this thing here. This is really a functional role for that. I'm going to show you that, in fact, this is the main thing that helps us to improve this internal representation of the object so that a simple linear readout is able to do the classification. And Nicolas did this with all the classical techniques, very sophisticated, a convolutional network in our case. You may know those things. We simply added that one with this discriminator here and again got rid of all the details to really have what we believe is an implementation that we could copy into our microcircuitry model. This is behind all those simulations I'm showing you, and here is now the evolution of these V1 activities during non-REM and REM dream from here to here. Original images of these CIFAR 10 datasets look like that. You have boats, animals, cars, and so on, and you encode that, and now you're learning, as I was showing you during wake and non-REM, REM, and so on, this network. And here I'm just showing you a test. We are replaying from hippocampus those internal states and see how the image looks like if generated in V1. And of course, in the beginning of learning, it's just random. After a while, you do see dreams that look more realistic. And we have a measure that captures this realism in terms of human perception. This is the so-called Fresche inception distance based on all other networks that are touching human perception and so on. We see that this realism is increasing throughout training of our sleep model that we call PAD for perturbed and adversarial learning. Perturbed in non-REM, adversarial in REM learning. Right, and now we ask, did that help to improve our internal representation of those various objects that we're seeing? And it does. So here we're simply visualizing in some way these more than 200 dimensions appear in this latent space of these full images by simply projecting those images into a two-dimension formed by principal components. That's all. And you can see now that the different objects encoded by colors here are projected to different regions in these first two principal components. We have also the alignment of the occluded images through by the non-occluded, because we have the non-REM dream. There we are really getting the robustness to those noise, and without this noise we wouldn't have, non-REM, we wouldn't have this alignment. But without REM, that's more crucial, is really no such clustering, less clustering, let's say. And this is, and here we see the, sorry, okay, here we see now the thing without non-REM now, and the occlusion falls apart from the non-occluded representations we not trained during REM sleep to complement these images Lars was speaking about. So that's a classical data augmentation approach. The whole question is how to augment. By simply adding noise and combining, it's not enough. We have to creatively augment, and that's the role of our REM sleep. And if you creatively complement or augment the data, and then we are improving really for future classification. That's our results, and here we also can measure these intra-class distances versus inter-class distances. It's best. The full model is best, and we did that test on 2 data sets, this CIFAR 10 and also this street view house number test. A little bit less challenging test, but there too we see that we're getting a nice clustering here in this latent space. And I'm always amazed that this does work. From where does this network know that it should cluster those images into objects? It's impressive for me. Well, because the object is in these many thousand images, the common things, there are 10 common abstract things, these abstract objects, and the network manages to figure out what as a whole object is in there, the thing that is common through this deep layer and reconstruction and our creative dream and so on. So that's behind that. And we can now apply also what we of course know that's happening if you want to classify. We are simply interrogating our latent representation, have a simple perceptron, 10 perceptrons that we're training now to classify these 10 classes on top of this internal latent representation, and we manage well. Here is now the result for this full path, the full perturbed adversarial dreaming model. We're getting these performances, which is really pretty good. Again, that's a test of the unsupervised classification in the latent space, basically, by simply adding this linear readout. And the point is now, if we are omitting the REM sleep, we do much, much worse. That's here. We can also still have this REM dream and have the adversarial learning of the REM dream, but without combining roses and tulips. Then also we do a less good job in classifying future images. That's what you see here. We do a little bit better, but both components are important. We should be creative in combining objects, and we should be adversarial in creating new things out of those combined objects. These are the things that we're adding the message. So creative coding, and I do believe that this plays an important role in also understanding scenes, as we can show here for that network, but likely also for us. And here again the proof of concept that also non-REM is important in this model. If we delete non-REM, of course we are less accurate here for these intermediate occlusions. Here a car that is occluded a little bit, and in the test the next day we are doing a less job also for this classification if we simply dropped that non-REM thing. That's a classical thing. We are not the first showing that this replay is important to consolidated memory. So this is also important here. And now I'm coming to the end and try to draw this bridge to this awareness again and to these matching ideas in layer 5 pyramidal neurons. Up to now, we were speaking about separate pathways, encoding pathways and generative pathways. In fact, Nicola suffered for a long time because I asked him, Nicola, try to do everything, these pyramidal neurons, everything is connected, there's no such thing like a layer 2-3 pyramidal neuron that only gets feed-forward input or only gets top-down input. And he convinced me that it's simply not possible because we would get shortcuts by combining in a single network all those things that of course we can reproduce here directly what we are seeing by simply taking that activity here and feeding there, and so we need to have a separation into 2 pathways. And that's what we were telling Lars, Mukli and Christian Nevelt, and said, of course, Walter, we do see something like that in our occlusion elements. We have neurons that may, in fact, only respond to top-down or only to feed-forward and those things. So that's a collaboration that is going on. And here we see now these original images occluded here, and what we produce out of those things by going through this loop. And you see we are cleaning away those occluded things, that we are really expecting to see something. And of course, the first idea was, Nicola, couldn't you also have this gain modulation now that we were proposing, Matthew and me, 18 years ago, in our old model, that we have a gain modulation, and he did that for me. Oh, okay, and here it is. So here we now introduce this layer 5 pyramidal neurons, and we simply feed in this X activity here, and have this other activity here as a gain modulation that we are multiplying. Here we go. And what we get is, in fact, a cleaned up version, kind of what we expect. You know, we're cleaning up all these occlusions, and we are now seeing what is important. That's one way. In fact, maybe there are such populations of neurons that have this cleanup that really respond to a match between what we expect and what is seen. Okay? And we postulate that those may be involved in this awareness or consciousness, as opposed maybe to the other pathways that may run subconsciously, because they constantly loop around here. You see, you have, maybe in a Bayesian sense, completion of what you're seeing, but you don't want to be confused. You want to be sure that this is generated from outside and is completed and so on. So you need to have a handling of these different types of information and be able to ask what is now coming from outside, shut down the other things, and tell me what's happening if we combine these, and so and those type of things. So I believe you have different types of classes. And here comes now again this challenge of the tiger. I do believe here, and this was my question to you, Matthew, that we should have a new version, Matthew, basically, of our old thing. So the model is done, data have to be produced. I'm telling this to you because we have already preliminary data, not too much preliminary data actually, it's in review with Ben Schönfeld and Fridtjof Helmchen, where we do see that in fact activity up there is, as we postulated, is an error. In fact, it is up here an error that, of course, is produced through excitation and inhibition. We even see there that it is a prospective error in terms of what we call saliency prediction error. It's predictive because we have an experiment where the mouse is going to see or feel a texture, and the tone is predicting the texture, and apical activity is already evoked by the tone. In fact, independently of whether it gets reward or punishment, it's simply telling there's a salience event soon, and we are predicting that salience event, and that is perhaps increasing the gain of the neuron. So it's the error, you know, it's only the beginning, and if the event comes, there's no more activity in there. So it's not a match, it's really the initial mismatch that increases the gain. In that sense, I'd be postulating there's a new class of cells, layer 5. Again, likely we do record from layer 5 pyramidal neurons in those dendrites that in the apical tree have the error. A prospective error, in that case it is a saliency prediction error because it's independent of whether we get a reward or punishment. That's our new theory. That is of course influenced by these ideas here, suggesting Fridtjof to test that, and we may go on and asking more specific questions whether it's really the difference of the tiger to the dog or the tiger itself that is encoded there, or that, yeah, right. I postulate it's the difference, it's a predicted difference. That's it. So, to go through again, I started with this perturbed adversarial dreaming model of sleep, showing you that we have separate pathways, an encoder, a generative pathway, and a discriminator. And the postulate is that this may be implicated in perceiving something as real by simply asking a discriminator, perhaps situated in this anterior prefrontal cortex, according to these reality monitoring experiments, that are telling us, giving us a label to those pyramidal neurons that see a match or that see a deviation from what is expected, and then we may become aware of that thing we are seeing. That's the question, and again, to be tested whether it's really differentially prediction or a prediction as here, and where this a reality signal might be. So we can really have testable predictions here right now where this additional thing that I'm convinced must believe, because we are able to distinguish V1 activity from dream or imagination and reality. So that's food for experiments and future talks. And with that, I would like to thank again all my people in the lab, colleagues as well, including Human Brain Project, with whom we have lots of discussion to generate all those new ideas and hoping it goes on. And here we see our founding. Thanks much for listening.